Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to a special live stream edition of the Police Accountability Report. As I always make clear, and I'm going to repeat it here live, this show has a single purpose: holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And remember, we don't just focus on the bad behavior of individual cops. Instead, we examine the system that makes bad policing possible. And tonight, we certainly have a problematic system to explore, but more importantly, we are going to connect the dots, so to speak, between systemic police abuse and what we commonly refer to as crime. But we will also be joined by the renowned cop watcher, the Batusai, who will join us to update us on his battle to maintain our rights to record the police. And we will also be joined by one of the youngest and newest additions to the Legion of Cop Watchers working across the country. Her name is Adzari, and she and her father were a victim of police abuse, which we featured on the show. But her experience has prompted her to actually become a cop watcher and a defendant of the First Amendment. So we are very excited to be joined by her and her father this evening. And please remember, folks, this is a live show. So if we have any technical difficulties or I make a few mistakes, please be kind, because I really am trying my best. And I just want you to know, I will also be looking down at my computer on occasion because I want to see what you guys are saying in the live chat. I see Michael Willis, I see Noli D, I see Lacey R, I see Agent Orange, I see some names I'm really glad to see here. But I also see someone else that's kind of a surprise. It's my reporting partner, Stephen Janis, who, once again, by special exemption, has been allowed indoors. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome to. I'm so happy to be inside again. I mean, it's been what,
Winter
like 4 or 5,
coming.
4 or 5 months
Beware.
was the last time I got to be inside. But at least 4 months. So really, this is wonderful, and I feel good, and I'm so thankful that you let me come back inside again. I know I have to leave, but for now, I'm very happy.
Please remember, this is a special dispensation,
Yes.
And you will be outside at the end of the stream.
Okay.
Sorry, folks.
All right. Well, fine. I mean, it's kind of where people expect me to be.
That's where they want to see you. That's what the people want.
They want me to be
Stephen
outside
Janis
holding
outdoors.
a mic, regardless of weather, circumstance. Okay, fine.
Yeah. That's what people
I've
want.
accepted that.
Got to give it to them.
I've accepted it as my destiny. So no complaints here.
So tonight, Stephen, we are going to be taking on this very controversial thesis, and that's about how bad policing actually makes crime worse. So, Stephen, you and I have talked about this subject quite a bit. And I was hoping you could start us off with a few points about this topic. So why don't you break down for us how we're going to approach this?
Well, it's really interesting because we have covered cop watchers, we have covered policing, and there's a commonality and a common theme in all of these stories we covered, which is the policing of space. And I think we had the idea after we covered a story in Trenton, New Jersey, where a man named Michael Banks was arrested by police who basically just pulled him out of his car with no pretense. And the idea came to us because we were thinking, the policing of space is probably the most significant aspect of policing, or one of the most significant aspects of policing that is, I guess, under-recognized, but very important to understand how it affects the way we live and the way we think. And that's because police, in a sense, creates an ideology around space. Like, for example, this is good space, this is bad space. Because when we were reading the statement of probable cause of Michael Banks, which we will show you soon what happened, they said this is a quote-unquote high crime area. Now, what does that mean? Well, when we went to Trenton and we hung out in the neighborhoods and we talked to the people there and we looked at the businesses, it wasn't a high crime neighborhood. It was a neighborhood of people striving, trying to survive and make a go of a business, or we saw a man who was rehabbing homes. The point is that police had turned that space into quote unquote bad space. And similarly, when we were talking to Batusai later, how he tries to film police stations and police say that is prohibited space.
Right.
In other words, this psychology of space is extremely important. And we're going to talk about some concepts later that will make it even more important, like the concept of meta-capitalism that we talked about. That is extremely important to understanding this. But most important is remember that police define space because it's really, really an important way to infringe upon our rights collectively. Because our ability to do things in space, like photograph, like film, like Batusai did in his famous case, Turner v. Driver, it was about space and the ability to act in space. And so when we have looked at this, especially when we went to Trenton, it kind of reminded us that one of the things we've experienced in this town, in Baltimore, is that police take over those public spaces and they police them in a way that changes the ideology of the space, which is the expectations of the people who live there or live in that space, and also the way they perceive themselves. And that's a really important concept. I don't think it's a concept that's understood well enough. I mean, you and I have been working on a documentary about tax breaks. And what the city does is take spaces and say, this space is rich space.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to pay taxes here, and this is poor space. You have to
Right.
pay taxes here. And what do they do on top of the poor spaces? They throw in aggressive policing. And what we
Right.
saw in Trenton is aggressive policing to turn space into an ideology. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about. And why that affects a community is because that is a violent ideology. And that, I
Mhm.
think, in a sense, stimulates violence.
You know, I really am glad that you brought up the idea of policing space, and in particular when you mentioned Trenton, New Jersey, because seeing what happened to Michael Banks in Trenton, New Jersey, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but Michael Banks was accosted and assaulted in Trenton because he was in what was considered a high crime area.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in the aughts in an area that was considered a high crime area. And because of that, I experienced zero tolerance policing. And zero tolerance policing was a period of about almost a decade in
Mm-hmm.
my city, where essentially a police officer could arrest you for spitting on a sidewalk, having an open container of beer in public, or more importantly, not having your ID on you. And I can tell you, this is something I experienced myself. I could literally not leave my apartment without having a state verified ID on me, because if that officer said, do you belong here? Do you live in this neighborhood? They would say, show me your ID. And if you couldn't prove that you lived in that neighborhood, they would arrest you. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but I can tell you, I've seen it myself. And it wasn't just anecdotal. It wasn't just what happened to me. I literally went through over 300 statements of probable cause from the Baltimore City Police Department, where people were arrested for urinating in an alley, spitting on a sidewalk, drinking open beer in public, or not having ID, failure to ID, not being able to prove that you lived in that neighborhood. And you know what's the worst part about this policy? It didn't even make us safer. I mean, Stephen, you were here during the
Yeah,
aughts, and you remember this
I
was
was
brought
here.
in by our mayor, Martin
Right.
O'Malley,
Yes, Martin
right?
O'Malley, who was going to be the president of the United States, but ended up getting 0%.
Yeah,
Yes.
we have some feelings about Mayor O'Malley.
But I think what's really interesting about this is the way it changed Baltimore's perception of itself, which was the people in those spaces had their rights violently stripped from them. And I think it adopted a psychology of defensiveness, of estrangement from governance,
Yes.
and then also, a sense of we're on our own, and I think that psychology of space and the way it changed the neighborhood, the contours of the neighborhood, is very similar to what we saw in Trenton.
Yes.
It was just interesting when we were in Trenton, and we should go to that story now and talk a little and show people the video. But what the police did in that case was rip him out of his car with no pretense, or no pretext, excuse me. And that is something very similar to Baltimore, and something very similar to many cities that are afflicted with poverty and that aren't participants in the meta-capitalism, sort of regime that we deal with. And I think that sort of transfers the psychology of state power in a way that makes people feel estranged and makes people feel isolated and makes people angry.
You know what, let me just, you mentioned something that's actually a concept that sociologists look at, which is called political efficacy.
Right.
And being arrested impacts your political efficacy. And your political efficacy is basically your sense that you are able to have any sort of impact or any influence over the government. And just one single arrest can make it so that you lose your sense of political efficacy, which means that essentially the state is disenfranchising you, feel that you have no impact. It's not necessarily that people feel apathetic. They've been essentially told they don't matter. They've been told they can't really participate fully in our government's processes.
And what's interesting about that, Taya, is that starts all with your story about the ID, right? Because you knew if you didn't have an ID on a public sidewalk, you could be arrested and thus lose your political efficacy. So what does that tell you? That tells you that, like we see with the two side, which we talk to later, that ability to function and to assert your rights in space is incredibly important. I mean, in public spaces is so important to your overall political efficacy, your psychological health, but also it's so important for the state to control it in a way that diminishes that. Because democracy basically might self-correct in this sort of unequal world we live in, but as long as we have policing the space and taking away those rights, that's a way to kind of subvert any sort of democratic pushback in those neighborhoods, as we have seen. And I think what we saw in Trenton too. So we should talk a little about Michael Banks' story.
So you know what? First, Dwayne is back there helping us out. So is Kayla Rivara. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So we're going to be asking Dwayne to act. You know what? We're going to let the video speak for itself. Dwayne, if you wouldn't mind sharing clip 1 of Michael Banks' encounter with police. And when you have a chance, if you can check to make sure that I'm having a little trouble putting the comments from StreamYard up on the screen. And I really want to make sure to be able to highlight some of the comments I'm getting here. So if you could just take a look and then maybe run clip 1 for us. Pretty please.
Excuse me? Excuse me, sir. Hey, how are you, sir? I'm all right. Oh, okay. This is something I can help you guys with. Y'all are pulling me out my car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. I'm going to remove you.
Now, okay, so you got to see the first part of that clip where Michael Banks was approached by police. They barely gave him even a moment to
I don't even think
interact
they
with
said they were cops.
They didn't even say that they were police officers.
Too, right?
And the first thing that Michael Banks did was he put his hands up. I don't even think they asked him for his license. I think they went straight to get out of the car, and immediately started to restrain him. I mean, how did you view it,
Well,
Stephen?
yeah, I mean, basically they didn't say they were police officers. They started dragging him out of the car. He's trying to ask them what is going on. His car was parked. He wasn't committing a crime. It's a basic, really, really horrible assault on his rights. And of course, it gets worse, because not once they get to the car and they sort of confront him, and you can see in both videos the cops just open the door without any pretext, without saying anything. Then they drag him out of the car. So Dwayne, if we have clip number 2, if we could run clip number 2 so people can see what happens when he gets dragged out of the car.
Excuse me, sir. Hey, how are you, sir? I'm all right. Oh, okay. This is something I can help you guys with. Y'all are pulling me out my car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. I'm going to remove you. Get down. You're under arrest. On the ground. You're under arrest. Car.
Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Thanks,
I was checking those comments there.
Yeah.
So as you can see, they didn't give him any instructions to get out of the car, and they essentially violated every constitutional right that you can imagine. And that didn't stop them from dragging Mr. Banks out of the car, taking him to the ground, and breaking his nose. And so one of the reasons that we covered this story, and the reason we're revisiting it tonight, go just beyond, another obviously glaring example of questionable conduct by police. But we're also talking about this story. It's because it's what happens when police are not held accountable. Right. How bad policing sows chaos in a community. A lot of people don't realize how much impact an arrest has. I was talking about political efficacy, but imagine, sitting in a Baltimore City jail or a Trenton, New Jersey jail for a couple days. That usually doesn't go over too well with your boss. It can be incredibly disruptive to your life. I mean, right. I think it's very, very clear.
And to your point about accountability, which is really interesting, as we investigate. Now, of course, if anyone watched this show saw Taya's infamous or famous entry into the Trenton Police Department, where she tried to get the spokesman to talk to us, but they would not, or a spokesperson, excuse me. But I didn't stop there. I followed up, and because Michael Banks had actually filed a complaint, I went to the Mercer County Attorney's Office and asked them about the complaint. And they told me, they said, yeah, we looked at it and we referred it to the Attorney General's office, which is kind of interesting, right? Mm-hmm. I asked them, I said, well, did you rule on it anyway? Did you find it, unfounded or founded, or make any sort of action? Did you inform the police department? They're like, no, we just referred it. And I went to the New Jersey State Attorney General's office, and they said, we can't comment one way or another on a criminal investigation. The point here is that you have this horrific abuse of Mr. Banks' rights. Mm-hmm. Mr. Banks files a complaint. The complaint goes nowhere, and now it's in what I talked to an attorney just on background. I'm not going to mention who he is, but involved in a later case of this actual same unit who shot someone, as we will talk about, and said the Attorney General's office is just kind of like a black hole where they dump complaints and no one ever follows up. So it is a very distressing sort of, you have a confluence of issues here, themes in policing. You have this policing of space in a very violent, aggressive manner, and then a system set up to literally bury any sort of pushback. Again, to your point of political efficacy. And when people feel isolated, and when people feel like they have no say in their lives and they have no control over space, I think it really engenders a disposition of violence in the community. And I think that's why we see policing in these communities already struggling with poverty, why policing is like the final straw in many cases.
And something I'd like to point out is this is the same unit and the same officer that used these same tactics that shot Jawan Henderson in the neck just a few months later. The circumstances surrounding Jawan Henderson's shooting are very shocking, and they're very similar.
Yeah.
Henderson had left an apartment he shared with his girlfriend to retrieve an iced tea they left in a car. And this is according to the lawsuit filed on his behalf. And then, just like in Michael Banks' case, an officer from the street crimes unit, including a cop that participated in Michael Banks' arrest, drove up, surrounded Henderson's car, started yelling at him to open the door, then tried to break the window of the car, and then they shot him. And since that shooting, Henderson has been partially paralyzed and has filed a major civil rights lawsuit. But since we've reported on Michael Banks, we've been investigating another example of this bad policing, because as you mentioned, Michael Banks actually filed an internal affairs complaint against the same unit that shot Jawan Henderson. So honestly, if they had listened to Michael Banks, there's a chance Jawan Henderson might not have been shot. And Stephen, you mentioned some background that you'd gotten on
Well,
that
so
lawsuit.
like I said, I tried to follow the complaint, and it just went into this sort of bureaucratic maze where it now doesn't exist, but where nothing's really happening. It's been a year, over a year and a half, and nothing has happened. And I don't think anything is going to happen, even though when we did our own reporting on this case, we found that there was a direct conflict between what they'd written on their sworn statements in terms of what happened, where they said Mr. Banks was yelling and screaming and gesticulating and being aggressive, which wasn't true, and what they wrote, it still has gone nowhere. So again, that whole cycle that we talked about of like I would say the best way to put it is sort of taking away people's political efficacy, taking away the right to their space, and stripping of their rights, and then having a system that basically effectively insulates police from any sort of accountability is the problem, which is a good transition into our guest, who knows a lot about this.
Yes, he does. And I just want to add one thing that we had uncovered, that we had found out from a very reliable source that the Attorney General's office is essentially a black hole to where those complaints go. So
you mentioned that.
I think, this reporting actually plays out and really illustrates
Well, I think
this.
it illustrates the point that we're trying to make, that before we talk to Patusai, that there is a serious disconnect between accountability and policing of space, and that's why we thought it would be good to have him as a guest, because he can talk about his own confrontation with police.
So now I am so excited to share with you our very special guest, the Patusai, also known as Philip Turner. And one of the reasons that we wanted to join us here is because he's very well respected in the cop watching community. And you may hear, if you watch cop watchers and First Amendment activists, you may hear them reference Turner v. Driver.
They all reference Turner.
Turner v. Driver. Well, this is the Turner behind the Turner v. Driver. So we just want to give a very warm welcome to the Patusai. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So let me just ask you like a very simple question at first. Let me give you an opportunity to define yourself. Do you consider yourself a cop watcher or an auditor? What is the best way to describe your work?
I don't know. It's like a mixture of all those things. It initially started as a cop watcher. And then we started these First Amendment tests before auditing became like a mainstream term that a lot of people use. There was this First Amendment test. And then now I would like to say I'm a video journalist. So it's cop watcher, maybe an auditor. I don't know if I would really consider myself much of an auditor. But my new project that I'm working on will definitely put me in that category as an auditor. And I would also dub myself as a video journalist, because I have several people who reached out to me with similar stories of their versions of police misconduct and police abuse. And I do my best to create a video that best tells their story accurately for many people to see.
Well, wait, you just kind of buried the lead there, because you said new project. Is that the new project? Because I think a lot of people want to know what your new project is. And of course, I'm curious now. So what is the new project? Or if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to.
I could talk about it.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So just right above this microphone there, you see a little box right there? That's going to be the equipment for my new project. It's a professional hidden camera.
Oh wow.
Have you seen? I'm sure you guys are familiar with Project Veritas and how they have like the hidden camera.
Yes, I am quite
and
familiar.
Yeah. So it's an interesting aspect when we see cops behave when they're on camera. Some cops are smart enough to, flip a switch to be like, I'm just going to be professional and just put on the front, versus how would they act if they were not on camera. So this is going to bring that to light, and it's pretty much just going to show, if that situation were to happen, how it really plays out.
So you were going to have encounters with cops where they don't know they're being recorded, is what you're saying.
Right.
That is really interesting. And there's something really fascinating too, because, I worked for a regular old TV station, and I used to be in constant battles with police and people over whether we could shoot on a sidewalk. And it's really fascinating to me that you just decided to start out doing First Amendment tests. Why did you think that was important? Because I knew it was important, but how did you arrive at that determination? Hey, I've got to make sure I can use my camera in this. Why did that become important to you, and what made you feel that was important to pursue?
Well, I would say that when I first started filming police stations, part of it was to prove a point.
Yeah.
When I started recording just regular traffic stops, I was told that you can't record police, you can't record it, you can't do it, it's against the law. But they can never tell me what law that is. They can't tell me what infraction I'm committing based on, what they're saying. And at that point, I'm like, oh, you're just telling me how you feel. Not necessarily that's correct, but you're going based on how you feel, and I shouldn't record you. Well, I took it a step further because, and I'm sure there's other people who have done it before too, but I started
of course
jumping on it as well, is because filming out in public is protected activity. You have a First Amendment right. Now, if we don't exercise that right slowly diminishes. The point that I was trying to make was, I can record you in the streets while you're conducting your traffic stops, all the way up to your police station on a public sidewalk. Like, there's no expectation of privacy in a public area.
That is so true. It's so great you did it, because I used to, even working for a regular old, like I said, television station, I would encounter the same problem. And the thing that occurred to me when it would happen was that, hey, if we can't film on a sidewalk, we're out of business. Basically, and our First Amendment rights mean nothing if you can't film on a sidewalk. And yet, as you pointed out through your work, which I think is brilliant, is that, police still are on this assumption they can come up to a person on a public sidewalk and say, you can't film us. And I think, is this a battle that's still going on in your mind? Do you think that police still have this, even with all the work you've done, other people have done, that police still have this assumption that they can mess with you when you're on a sidewalk filming?
Absolutely. There's actually 2 cases that in Texas that I'm aware of. One of them was Lake Jackson. A guy was he runs a Facebook community news group for Brazoria County. He was filming a traffic accident. Like, he just pretty much updates the community of what's going on. The officer pretty much told him it was illegal to take pictures of license plates in a public area.
Wow.
It actually resulted in him getting injured from being arrested, and he ended up filing a lawsuit. And Turner v. Driver was used as a strong reference in that lawsuit. And then we have another incident in Mata in Fort Worth, the very same city where this case law originated from, Fort Worth.
Wow.
Lieutenant Driver is of course, a lieutenant with the Fort Worth Police Department. Mata was on a sidewalk. He was roughly maybe 200 to 250 feet away from the traffic stop. He was approaching it. The officer abandoned his traffic stop and walked all the way to Mata. And you could tell he was very far away, and he was on a sidewalk, and they arrested him.
And I think Texas police seem to be, it's a major generalization to talk about Texas police, but I've seen a lot of troubling cases, First Amendment cases in Texas. Is there something different in Texas? But even though it's a very diverse state with a lot of different cities, but it seems like a lot of stories come out of Texas. Is it because police just don't understand the First Amendment in Texas?
I think a lot of it has to do with the leadership,
Okay.
from the top down. It's the lack of training, the lack of the leadership coming from the top down on keeping these officers accountable for their actions. Now, a lot of it stems from I would say the requirements for being a police officer. They're so low. Like, level of IQ doesn't have to be high. The years of training to be a police officer is very low. I just think that these officers are not equipped to go out in the street and enforce laws correctly.
Yeah, I mean, and there was a really case that we covered with HBO Max, Matt, and Corners News, where they've been charged with organized crime, and the evidence was really nothing. There was no evidence, and yet they were able to get these charges past the judge, and I was just stunned. And it made Texas seem a little scary that police, these guys had been accused of nothing. They were in their car, and they hadn't even been standing on a sidewalk. And does that type of case concern you?
It does. This is what we would relate to as retaliation, because how dare you come to our county or our city and record us? And this is an example because I'm sure you guys are familiar with my Corrigan case, where they had the ordinance. Livingston is not that far from Corrigan.
Oh, okay.
They've seen what's going on with Corrigan, and they're pretty much setting an example right now, saying if you're going to come to our city, this is pretty much what we're going to do. Wow. We're going to tack on these charges, and they might not stick. They know they're not going to stick, so they're just going to keep resetting the cases, reset. They're just going to drag you through this legal battle and just wear you down.
Yeah.
And probably the whole goal is just to make sure they don't come back and record us again.
Well, let me ask you a question just that kind of speaks to the essence of this whole issue. Why don't police want to be recorded? I mean, I've seen, we had a case with Eric Brandt where he was recording a police officer, just not saying a word, just recording a traffic stop, and then they interfered, and that ended up being a 10th Circuit decision on qualified immunity. But why are police so afraid of being recorded? What is it about recording a cop that brings out this, I guess would be instinct to override the First Amendment?
I think cops are afraid of what we might catch on camera. I think once we start exposing their bad practices, more people are starting to catch on. Right now, the greatest weakness to police officers is cameras and social media. Social media has boomed like I've never seen before. Social media has always been around, but not to the level it is now. It makes it easier for people to share their experiences with law enforcement. And a lot of those officers do not want to be painted in a bad light, or they don't want to be on social media, period. However, that's the whole aspect of they're letting their feelings get in the way of what's actually lawful.
Yeah. And I mean, in a way, you're exposing the fact that they don't want to be held accountable because, you're holding them accountable, and they don't want that, and they're not used to it. And
you know what? I have to just jump in here because you brought up social media. Okay. And so I had a little incident when I was doing my version of holding police accountable.
Oh, yes.
I had gone to Trenton, New Jersey, asked to speak with their press information officer, spoke to them. They said they'd be available. They could answer. We'd email back and forth. They said they could answer 2 out of 4 questions because there's ongoing investigation, et cetera, et cetera. Came up on Wednesday. She said, I'm sorry, I can't speak to you today. I have a half day. I said, well, I'm here with my camera. But of course, if you don't want to go on camera, I can just take notes. That's fine. I just need to get your statement. So she said, well, I'll be there Thursday and available after 2 p.m. So I show up Thursday at 2 p.m. I go in, and Dwayne, if you don't mind, could you just play clip 5 of Taya's TikTok if you have that available? Hi, this is Taya, and I'm here at the Trenton, New Jersey Police Department. I'm here because I spoke to the press information officer yesterday, who was having a half day yesterday, so she wasn't available to speak. She agreed to give me comment, not necessarily on the Michael Banks case because it's still an ongoing investigation, but to let us know about their process for looking at excessive force complaints, to speak to us, to just give us some sort of comment about their process, what it takes for an officer to be retrained, why there is a particularly aggressive violent crime initiative in the area, etc. I came here to get comment. However, it took 6 phone calls inside to find out that she's not even in the building. She had a half day yesterday. I came in today. It took 6 phone calls to find out she's not even in the building. And apparently, she's the only person who is designated to speak to the public. She's the only person who's designated to speak to the press. So this lets you know how difficult it is to get accountability. I drove all the way from Baltimore City to speak to her in person, and she can't even be bothered. So I hope you got to see that video, because this video, I posted it on TikTok and it got my account permanently banned. No appeal, no process. My account was shut down. There was literally nothing I could do.
Taya,
So
I don't think I've ever seen you so. You are usually I'm around Taya. Well, when I'm let inside, I'm around Taya, and she is a calm and cool, collected person. But you were not happy when Trenton Police ghosted you.
No, I was not
ghosted
pleased
you when you
at
were
all.
sitting in that lobby there, and they were just saying, "No, she's not." There were like 5 cops sitting there, kind of telling you the same thing, like.
5 cops, 6 phone calls, and no press information officer.
Maybe
I was a little miffed.
Maybe TikTok couldn't take the heat, because I was surprised you were banned.
So that was the video that got my account banned. So I want to know about your experiences and your opinion on the effect that social media can have on us trying to hold police accountable. I mean, my account was shut down completely. I had to start a new one.
Yeah, so that's funny how you brought that up, because I actually have a TikTok account and I got banned a week ago.
Oh, really? What?
Yes.
May I ask what happened? Like, why?
I don't know. I
So
guess
weird.
they didn't necessarily agree with the content that I was posting, which is very similar to what I have on my Facebook and YouTube page. So I think TikTok is more, I don't know. I just think there's not very sensitive. I will definitely say that.
A little pro
Yeah,
Leo,
but a little anti-journalism, because I mean, I've seen your work with Two Sides Journalism. I watched you. You were doing what any journalist would do if they
and I wasn't using foul language. And
Nothing.
And I also know, Philip, that you don't use foul language when you do your cop watching. There wasn't vulgarity, foul language, any of these things. It was just simply showing what police do and don't do, and that was enough. So my concern is that these platforms have an incredible amount of power to control us, being able to reach out to each other, being able to actually hold police accountable. We won't be able to share our experiences. Imagine if you have a violent encounter with a police officer and you want people to know about it, but it's censored. So, I mean, that's a terrifying thought, that these big platforms can prevent us from showing what's happening in our lives and what's happening with our government. It's very scary.
Well, so before you go, can you tell us that?
Does he have to go?
No, he doesn't. But is there?
I can stay.
Is there a name for this new project that your Project Veritas? Is there like a name for it, or is it?
Actually, I don't even have a name for it yet.
Well, I, for one, am so much looking forward to seeing what he uncovers.
Oh, I know.
I mean, I can't wait.
And I'm kind of glad that we got to do a little bit of a reveal here
on the
Police Accountability Report about this new project coming out for the Batusai. I know everyone is very much wants to stay tuned and find out what you're doing next.
The headline of the YouTube is Batusai going undercover. I, for one, want to see
I know.
We could just call it Batusai Undercover.
That's cool.
If you want to just do it for the Police Accountability Report, I think we'll be willing to work out a deal.
Yeah, we could figure something out.
I think it'd be some pretty good content.
But yeah, I would say this. The last time I did, one of the times I did go undercover, because I did go undercover earlier today. That's where I discovered a watch commander just acting inappropriately, just being unprofessional. And then he totally changed whenever I pulled the camera out of my pocket and started recording. I do have that video on my channel. I did some digging into him, and I found out that he lied on his job application. When I exposed that, the city then turned on me and said that I went to the city hall and I went to the police station. This was a couple years ago, by the way. I went to the police station, city hall, but specifically at the police station, that I went there with the sole intention to intimidate the staff. I was wearing a hooded overcoat and was possibly concealing a shotgun in my hooded overcoat. And they put this as a press release. I do have a video on that.
Wow.
But this is the very importance of recording, because I recorded the entire encounter from me walking in and leaving out. And then once I put a video, I released a full video, which was released like maybe a month after they put that press release out. So I referenced that video, and then the next day they retracted that statement and issued an apology. And then they forced that watch commander to either get fired or retire. So I can tell you, as of right now, he's no longer an officer. He's still not an officer. I constantly check with TICO, which is a Texas Commission of Law Enforcement. They keep a record of all, I say, current licenses and current commissions for all law enforcement in the state of Texas. So I can do an open records request to figure out which officers are still officer and which departments they have went to. So a simple open records request, I can pretty much get an answer within 4 to 5 days, which is really quick. And I can figure out what department they moved to. I can figure out if they're an officer or if they're just still, or if they're no longer an officer. So I think that's a very important tool that most people don't know.
Yeah, and you were doing great work, great journalism work.
Yes.
One thing, do you find, I mean, a lot of police officers, we've experienced this in our reporting, where they'll screw up somewhere and then move somewhere else.
Yes.
Where they
travel.
aren't aware
They'll move to another. They'll move to another state.
Do you see that in your tracking of these cops? That's amazing work. That's fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you see that kind of stuff, like cops trying to like go to a new town where people don't know what they've done wrong?
Yeah, we call them gypsy cops. I'm sure. I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
I'm sure. Yeah, so I'm sure that term's been around a while, but
I've never. Heard
I don't think it's been. I don't think it's like well known. But this is pretty much in the community what we call them gypsy cops. But I think that's a lot of the point of when they department hop. They try to resign in the middle of investigation so they can keep their peace officer license, and then they go to another department. So they want to quit and retire. However, there are stipulations for like resigning while you're during an investigation. Now, if you're going to get fired, if you're going to get fired pending the investigation and you quit, you can't be a police officer anymore. That actually happened in the Lake Jackson incident where I was telling you, the guy that was filming the traffic accident and where he was attacked and arrested. He can't be a police officer anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, keep us updated. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, please
Again,
do.
now we should go from a legendary cop watcher to a new cop watcher.
To a new cop watcher.
Yeah, why don't you give them a little background on our next guest? But Batusai, thank you so much. And if you could stick around, that's great, because you're amazing,
because I'm sure people will have a few questions for you. And there is one question that I promised. I did a YouTube community post. Someone asked this question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And I promised I would ask it.
What is it?
Well, it's about becoming a cop watcher. Should we ask at the end after Azari?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind sticking around for a sec?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay. So since on this show, we try to make it a priority to cover the stories that the mainstream media shuns. And as you know, we like to report and follow the work of cop watchers across the country. Some people consider it controversial, but I think most people understand the value of it, even if they don't always agree with every single style of cop watcher. And we are going to bring you one of the youngest and newest cop watchers out there. Her name is Azari Holguin, and she first came to our attention when she sent us this video of the arrest of her entire family by El Paso police when she was filming the cops. Dwayne, do you think you could play clip 3 for us?
Because I was trying to get away from him so he wouldn't hit me, and I knew felt like he was going to hit me. And he grabbed me from my ankle. And that's what he did. And I was like kicking at him, and I tried like scratching. I'm sorry, can I get your name and badge number? D. Gonzalez and 3. Whoa, you cannot do that. It's all in my. You just grabbed my phone out of my hand and physically assaulted me. That is, recording is within my full right. You cannot have to. Can I get your name and badge number, please? No, can I have your name? E. Pineda and 3226. There's no reason for her to touch me. Okay, but there's no reason for her to get physical with me.
Just take off. Now, you want to be arrested for interference or take off? Your choice.
Interference with what?
My investigation.
Investigation of what?
Family violence.
But what am I doing? Why are you doing this? What am I doing?
Investigation now.
I would
told you to please put your phone away because we're investigating a domestic violence.
You need to verbally tell us your name and your badge number.
You have to do that.
Do you want to go in for interference or can you leave, please?
Interference of what? For what? What am I how am I interfering?
I'm gonna give you one last chance.
How am I
Do
interfering?
you want to be under arrest for interference or do you want to take off?
There is no reason for you to arrest me. What? Why are you touching her? You cannot touch her.
I will not hit you, but do not touch me.
All right.
I will not
I'm gonna
hit
get
you.
you.
So, as you can see in this video, Azari was filming her cousin's interaction with police after a domestic dispute, and she was doing so at the behest of a victim as a way to ensure police treated her fairly, and because the victim requested it. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because people have asked, why was she filming? She was there because the victim asked her to film the incident, both for her own documentation and because she wanted to make sure that, you know, she could remember things properly.
Let's remember, she was on her own property because that was a relative's house. So it was her property.
Exactly. That was her father's property. Her cousin lived on her father. That was her father's property. Her cousin lived on that property. Azari and her father just lived maybe 2 houses down. So this was the family's private property. And I want, Dwayne, if you don't mind, can you run clip 4? Because I want to show what happened when Azari's father had to intervene after the police confronted her. And this is the point where the cops decided that they were going to take in the whole family. Can you run clip 4 first, Dwayne?
Get over here. Get over here.
She got mad at me for recording. I was just recording.
You can't get mad at you. Can't do
She's gonna
anything.
assault you again.
She assaulted me physically. She grabbed me. She grabbed my phone.
Grab me as well. No, they're both under arrest.
Let's go. I'm not.
Sir, they're both under arrest right now. You wanna get another charge for evading arrest? They're interfering with my investigation.
Come here. Get out of here, man. Get out of here. Get out of here.
You're both under arrest.
Sayan!
No. You got a child. No, leave us alone. Get the fuck out of here. She's not dying. Fucking for children. What's wrong with you? What the fuck happened?
They got mad at me for recording. I was just recording Judith's statement.
So I'm glad everyone got to see what happened here. And as you can imagine, what the police report said versus what the camera showed us. And to talk a little bit more about that, we're going to have with us Azari Holguin and her father, Eddie. So Azari, thank you so much for joining us. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, Azari, first, I'd like to ask you if you can just give us an update on what's happened to you since the Police Accountability Report did its, story on you and it was viewed on YouTube. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's happened since?
Well, thanks to you and to James Freeman, after almost about 1.5 years of not being able to find anyone and constantly being rejected and turned away, we were finally able to find a lawyer.
Wow.
Oh,
So
that's
does that
terrific.
mean you filed a lawsuit or you're in the process of filing a lawsuit?
Well, it's still in the process.
I got you. Now,
Okay.
one thing I wanted to ask you about, because interestingly, after we published your story and it got a lot of views, a local media, a local television station contacted us to do a story, and they did one, but I didn't think it was that good. I mean, what was your impression? What was that experience like working with the mainstream media on your story?
Well, I think it was very short, cut to the chase, and didn't really fully explain correctly. I think the way you did your video and how you went through each detail very precisely and allowing me to really explain what was going on and how it happened, I think it was a lot better with you.
Oh, well,
Well,
thank you.
I
I mean,
mean,
I wasn't trying to fish for
yeah,
a
well,
compliment.
we were a
That
little bit.
wasn't.
We were a little
Oh, well,
bit.
you
But
were.
I mean, I just thought, what struck me about the story, the mainstream media story, which we can post a link to it later, was that they didn't really look at, when we reported your story, what struck me was the emotion, how it
Yes.
hurt your family, how,
Yes.
you said something about your dad. If something had ever happened to your dad, you would be devastated. And I don't think that the story they did capture that at all.
No, I don't think so at all. And because of that, if you don't mind sharing some of that with our audience, because I think sometimes people don't realize the incredible impact that an arrest can have, and especially because the arrest that happened to you and your father was actually quite violent. I believe you were outside raking leaves, and the police, who we saw in that scene earlier, came back later to basically tackle you and your father,
and a lot of cops.
And it was a lot of
Yeah, it was
officers.
like
I
5
think
or
I
6.
counted like 6 officers who came to that scene to take you down, and you're outside like raking leaves. You're
Right.
obviously unarmed. You're obviously not causing any harm. So just to an objective person, it's hard not to see that as a form of retaliation. So can you just talk a little bit about how that impacted you and how that felt to be taken to the ground like that, and then to see your father be taken in as well? I mean, just so people understand the impact that it has.
It was traumatizing. Now, anytime I see a cop, I freak out. Just the other day, I went to a haunted house on Halloween, and I was more scared of the cops that showed up lighting lights at the people in line. I was more scared of the police than I was the actual haunted house.
Oh my goodness.
No.
That is so sad. And to me, what this says, and this happens in my community a lot of times, young folks like yourself, teenagers, have these really traumatic encounters with police, and people don't realize how it impacts your psychology, how traumatic it is. And like we said, there's a sociological name for it, political efficacy. Outside of the trauma, a lot of times young people who have these really traumatic experiences with police don't trust government, don't feel that they can have any influence over government, and therefore they don't participate. So it impacts very deeply.
But also, though, you did contact us. You have been fighting to have a lawsuit. So what's made you want to fight back like this?
Yes, that's a good question.
Well, I've grown up seeing a lot of police brutality, and my dad has been a victim of police brutality multiple times in his life.
Wow.
He's gotten to the point where if he sees a policeman driving down the road, he'll pull over and he'll hide or pretend to go into some other street where he'll make all kinds of turns so that he could avoid them. He can't even go into Walmart anymore because as soon as he sees one of the police officers in there, he freezes and his knees get all shaky and his hands get all sweaty, and he wants to run away. He thinks they're gonna attack him. And seeing the way that they've traumatized not only him, but so many other people, and all the cases that don't get anything, they just get swept under the rug, and everyone that just gets dismissed, and we find no wrongdoing and all that. It's awful. I don't want to be another story swept under the rug. I want to see them truly held accountable.
That is wow.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
believe they'd have qualified immunity. I believe that's unconstitutional, and they are undeserving of a badge. They don't know the law. They don't honor their oath. They don't even know their oath. They don't uphold their policies, and they break their code of conduct. They do not deserve to be policemen.
Well, you were quite brave in the video when the cop tried to take your camera, and you pushed back against that. And now that you're fighting back, and you raise a good question, has there been any response from the El Paso Police Department about your case, or any type of apology or anything for you? No.
We haven't heard anything from anybody.
Wow,
that's terrible.
That is so. Did you want to?
No, I'm just, I was just thinking how much. We hear conversations about how police are doing community outreach and how they're trying to work with the community and trying to improve the relationship with the community, and just how much an apology could have gone, just how much it probably would have been helpful to you and your dad to have someone from the police department say, we are really sorry this happened. We know it was a traumatic experience. We're going to have some retraining and perhaps some discipline for the officers involved. And we actually do apologize for what happened. I mean, I think that would have gone a long way. And I just think it's such a shame that they didn't do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think that would have been enough. I don't think an apology or retraining can go far enough.
Yeah, I mean,
because everything starts from the top.
Right. Well, what is really kind of alarming about what you've told us, but speaks to our original theme of the show, was the trauma of your father, which is just very, very disturbing. That he would be so traumatized by police. And I think that's what we were kind of trying to get at when we're talking about policing space. What Batusai has fought for is that, there is a traumatizing effect when you can't go into a Walmart or you don't want to drive down the street. I know that when we talk about zero tolerance here, I was pulled over like 50 times when I was investigative reporter, 40 or 50 times in Baltimore. And so, for a while there, every time I saw a cop, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get pulled over, because you never know what's gonna happen. But listen to her talk about her dad and, not being able to go and do the normal things we want to do. That's why, like, Batusai's work is so important. Why holding police accountable in Trenton is so important, because police can literally turn into terrorists. They can terrorize you. And her father is obviously traumatized. I mean, how does your father feel about your activism now?
I think he's very proud.
Oh, good.
He should be proud.
He should be very proud. And I have to say, I was so impressed. I have to admit, at your age, I would not have had the presence of mind if a police officer started approaching me and threatening me with arrest. I don't know if I could have, stuck to my guns and held that camera up and said, no, I have the right to record. I want to know what your name and badge number is. I mean, it seems to me like you really understood your rights very well. Does that mean you were familiar with cop watchers? I mean, how did you know your rights so well?
Oh my gosh. My dad, he watches auditors, he watches the Real News Network, and he watches a lot of news and stuff like that. So really, if it weren't for my dad and the videos we watch on YouTube all day, I wouldn't have known my rights the way I do now.
Well, Batusai, Batusai, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
So I don't know if you saw the video, but I thought you did a pretty good job of.
Don't you think so? For a young person standing up for rights like that? What do you think? We have the expert here.
Yeah, we had the.
I'll say this, Atari. If I had a daughter like you, I would be super proud. I would be very proud.
Oh my gosh! That's just heart melting.
I think I'm gonna cry.
Oh no, that's really heart melting.
That really is.
That's beautiful.
I would be very proud. In fact, if you really want to do the whole cop watching thing, I'll be happy to take you under my wing and just definitely help you out, because you're here in Texas, and I don't know many cop watchers out towards the west part of areas.
So great.
I would definitely be happy to assist you and help you in any type of things. Like if you have any sort of questions, I can definitely give you some examples of what I would do, and that way you can apply it to your situations as well. But the most important thing that I try to exercise is just, you want everybody to be safe. If a cop wants to, arrest you, just don't fight it. The best thing you can do is fight it in court, because we have that case law, Turner v. Driver, which affirms that you do have the First Amendment right to record. Wow. So half the battle's already done. The second half is taking away their qualified immunity.
Well, I think we can end the show right here.
Oh my God, that's so amazing. Okay. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
How do you feel about that?
How do you feel about having like the Batusai?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's so great. Yeah. I'm just like,
well, we're seeing grassroots activism happen.
It's
in real
happening
time.
right here.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so beautiful. Yeah. And it's like the generations are passing on their wisdom to each other.
Yeah.
And they're all affirming our right to record, which protects all of us. Like,
I mean, the corollary to what we were talking about before is this type of activism where people, say, I'm not going to accept the policing of space, of our space, and we're going to stand up for our rights, And I think Well,
And you know what? This actually shows how beautiful the cop watcher community is. I
yes.
mean, that's one of the things that really amazed me when I first started looking into the cop watcher community. And of course, I was completely shocked that no one in the mainstream media apparently even knew that cop watchers and First Amendment auditors even existed. But like how welcoming they were, how willing they are to share information, how they are able to, if one cop watcher gets put
Absolutely.
in jail, they all work together to help raise bail for each other. Like how much they really take care of each other and lift each other up, and that's really beautiful. And,
Yeah.
and as Azari mentioned, James Freeman helped us connect
Right.
her to a good civil rights attorney. So he, that
Yeah.
sort of reaching
And
out and helping each other, that's really beautiful.
I think
and now the Batusai has a young mentor. I mean, I'm just
yeah,
like,
and
oh, I'm
and
just
and
so
what you
happy.
see here is it's not for some sort of ego or narcissism or what people often
Right.
accuse cop watchers.
Right.
It's just trying to help out a fellow human being, protect themselves and
Yeah,
have rights.
absolutely.
And I think we can all take an affirmative lesson from that, right? That there's more
Absolutely.
to this movement than what people try to, how they try to label it or say, it's frivolous or whatever. But this shows you that it's really a grassroots sort of
It's
movement.
activism. It's
It's a
activism
movement.
at its best.
Yeah, and
It
it's a
really
movement too,
is.
though, because when people are willing to like raise money for
Mhm.
each other's bail. I know that if you and I got thrown in jail, journalists wouldn't go online and start to
Oh,
raise
that's
money
the
for
truth.
us.
That is the truth.
Right, but here you have people.
I don't
who,
want to like name any names, but I
no,
know.
no names. But the point being that there would be no YouTube call around like they have in
no,
cop
they
watch
wouldn't
videos.
pass out the hat.
Right, and say
the
get
same way.
Stephen Taya. Like, we went to Milton, West Virginia, where we've had a lot of difficult stories.
But you know what, though? I know if, for example, like Otto the Watchdog or
Right.
Monkey 83 knew that I was
Monkey
locked
83,
up in
yeah.
Milton, West Virginia,
They drive down
they
there.
would drive down
Yep.
and try to help get me out. And that knowing the cop watcher community is kind like that means a
And
lot.
if anyone
It
knows
really
Otto
does.
the Watchdog, that man can drive. That man could drive to Hawaii if there
But
was
you
a
know what, though?
landmass.
Monkey 83 can make a cop disappear in under 60 seconds. I
We've-
actually
we've
witnessed
actually
this.
seen
I've
that
actually
too, yeah.
witnessed a cop watch by Monkey 83 right in front of my eyes, and he made a cop disappear in 60 seconds. I've
Right.
never seen anything like
So-
that. As a Baltimore City girl, his way of
I mean-
addressing police officers is something I couldn't do, but gosh darn if it isn't effective.
Well, and I think the lesson we can take away from here is that we painted a little dystopian picture at the beginning
Right.
of the show, but as you can see, there is hope, there is activism in the community,
Mhm.
there are people who care about each other. Batusai willing to help out, a new cop watcher in the community,
Yeah, that's so
and
great.
to offer his expertise and his passion for what he does. So I know we started out with this idea of policing space and the ideology of that and how that affects communities, but you see that communities have the tools to fight back, and I think that's a really important lesson, Taya. And I take heart at the fact that there are people like Batusai out there who really
Mhm.
care, and the people you mentioned also, Otto the Watchdog. I mean, you can go on a long
Yeah,
list of people.
There's a terrific
who
list of cop watchers.
they do this for the point of just preserving rights and for their own passion. Not, they're not professional journalists who
Mhm.
are working at a big organization. They do
Right.
this by themselves,
Yeah.
with their own cameras and their own YouTube. It's really what I think what's really marvelous about this country, in the sense that we have this sense of like, hey, if something isn't right, we can fix it ourselves. And
Mhm.
that is
The
also
true
a positive,
democratic spirit.
yeah. And we've been ignoring our guests.
Oh my
I'm
gosh,
sorry.
I'm so sorry. Well,
Yeah,
you know what?
we were
Maybe we should, while we have our guests here, take this time to wrap. Should we wrap it
Yeah.
up? We
Yeah, I
have
think we've been on an hour.
We've been on for an hour.
Yeah.
And I do want to say I apologize because I wasn't able to access the StreamYard like I normally do, so I wasn't able to interact with your comments as directly, and I do apologize for that. But I
Mhm.
hope we have been able to get your comments up on the screen. So I guess we're going to wrap up our time together. But
Let's thank-
first, I have to thank Philip the Batusai for taking the time to speak with us, to share the news about his new project, and to take our dear friend Azari under his wing. We really
thank you.
appreciate that so much. Thank
Thank you.
you, Philip.
Oh, wait. I thought you had a question.
I
for
do
me.
have a question for you.
Right.
I was
Oh.
going to, okay. So the question is, and I've gotten this a million times, and I said, just come to the live stream. I'll get an answer for you.
You should ask.
How do I become a cop watcher? And I said, I'm not the expert, but I know someone who knows a little something about it. If you come to this live stream, you can get the question answered. So for a person out there who is seeing this and is inspired, how do they become a cop watcher?
All right. So the first thing, and actually I do have a video on this too, by the way.
Oh, great.
But what I would start out with is practicing knowing your rights. You know, reasonable suspicion versus probable cause, know when they're allowed to search, when they're not allowed to search, know your laws when you're required to ID and when you're not. Every state has a different law when it pertains to IDing.
Very good point.
You don't have to have fancy equipment. There's people who record with their phones, and that's perfectly fine. That's how a lot of people started. That's how I started. And then you pretty much just kind of save and you can buy cameras later. However, just with a simple camera phone, you can do great wonders. If you want to take it up a notch, get like a body cam to kind of record just in case your phone gets taken or slapped out of your hand or whatever the case may be. So that way you can always protect yourself. And most importantly, I know a lot of people will get the jitters, and I would be lying if I said I did not get jitters when I record cops. In fact, that's perfectly fine because you never know what's going to happen. And in fact, what you can do is kind of take yourself into a mental space and just kind of picture something that keeps you calm and relaxed. That will definitely help you keep the nervous to a very minimum. And I think the most important thing that I think people should start utilizing more is asking questions to the police officer, because we all know police love to talk. They cops playing. We hear that term a lot.
That's true. That is true.
So this is what I like to call deposition time. So if the cop is willing to sit there and talk, I'm going to ask the correct questions. We'll take Atari's video, for instance, where the officer was saying, I'm going to arrest you for interfering. She did ask the right questions, like, you know, what am I doing? What am I interfering? I would probably slip in a question like, do you not want me to record? And then the officer will either subconsciously tell exactly what she thinks or how she feels because it's in the heat of the moment. And then that would definitely put the officer in a hot spot there. But we pretty much know, just looking at the video, that because she was recording, they retaliated against her. But getting that omission on video is a different dynamic.
That's very good advice.
Excellent advice. Yeah. It sounds like the advice that helps you set up a good lawsuit as well.
Yeah.
Yes. So the thing about it is like anything that's already video recorded, you pretty much want to ask questions, anything that's pertaining to the reason why you're being detained, because there's a good chance that if you do file a lawsuit, that video could be used as evidence for a jury trial for when they see the video, or that video could just be simply viewed in court. So that's the time right there to shine at your best. And it's by asking the right questions, knowing exactly what it is you can and can't do. And you could take it up a notch. If officer says you're required to ID, tell them what the penal code is or what the code is. So that way the officer cannot claim ignorance of the law. They can't sit there and say, oh, I didn't know. Well, they gave you the penal code, and that's exactly what happened in Turner versus Shriver, because the officers thought they could ID me, and even the judge in an oral argument said they gave them their own code, and the city, so cool. and their attorney could not rebuttal after that. Like there was nothing they could say to say, oh, well, we didn't know. Well, how does he know and you guys don't know? That's the bigger problem, right? So it just goes to show you like how strong of a cop watcher you can be just by exercising these few little steps.
And doing your homework is what you're saying.
And doing your homework.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, that's some great advice.
That is excellent advice. Yeah. And I want to thank you, Batusai, Philip, for being here tonight and being a terrific guest. And I want to thank you, Ansari, because seeing the way you stood up for your family and seeing you stand up for yourself, it really inspired me. I want you to know that. Yeah. You know, I was really, really proud of you, you know, so and I only wish I had been as courageous as you when I was a young person.
Do I have to go outside now, or can I stay?
You're going to have to go outside in just a minute. Well, but before you do, I have to say, you know, just a little hi to some of the people who've been in the chat that I really appreciate seeing, like Pineapple Girl and Shane Bushta. I see you in there. Hey, you guys, thank you so much. They also happen to be super friend patrons, so that is awesome. And I see some awesome people like Shock Prof, and I see some beautiful love being given to the Batusai. I see Broken System, Broken Trust out there. Hello, nice to see you. I think I also saw you on TikTok as well.
Michael Willis,
of course, giving us great support as well as really great insight. Of course, we have Noli D and Lacey R, who we appreciate.
Very
The Zombie
much appreciate
Enforcement
Noli D and
Bureau.
Lacey R.
Hello, Zombie Enforcement Bureau. And
Enforcement.
some people have like the best names. Hi, Agent Orange. I'll look for that link you sent me in the comments later. Hi, People News Today. And Furkan Bari, and I apologize if I don't quite say this correctly, said that we should do this again soon. So
Okay.
I think we're going to
Well,
have
look,
to do that.
We should thank Dwayne Gladden, our studio director,
Pineapple
and
Girl.
Kayla Rivera, our production director.
Absolutely.
I think I got the title right, for setting this up.
Mhm.
Because
Oh, and Jody LL, she was asking, how do we end qualified immunity? We have a really interesting PAR on that.
Yeah.
There was a case with Liberty Freak TV, Abdi Isaray, who actually
and
Eric Brandt, the notorious Eric
who
Brandt,
won a 10th Circuit case, you know, establishing that you have a right to record, basically.
right, and beginning to chip away a little bit at qualified immunity.
But you know,
it's a tough fight.
I think Philip or Batusa had a good point that if you can cite the law to the officer at the time, now that's not necessarily a federal constitutional right, but even if you could do that, you could say the officer was well aware it was established right because I cited it for him. That's a brilliant thing.
I know,
you put that on the record.
That's what I'm saying.
So if you say right now you're violating my First Amendment established right or whatever.
He's playing chess, not checkers. Okay,
and the cops are obviously playing checkers.
Okay,
yeah,
we see that.
But
let me just say hi to
you can't say hi to everyone in the chat.
I can't say hi to every single person in the chat. Hi Oso. Hi Red.
Okay. But
hi Michael Jacoby.
One last thing I want to say is that
hi Mom's wholesome videos.
Taya, I like this setup so much. I'm not going back outside anymore. This is too nice.
Then I'm going outside.
Kayla,
one of us has to be outside.
Done
That's
such a good
the way
job
the
with this.
PAR
No,
works.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here.
It is.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Yes, you've done a great job. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone. Unfortunately, I can say thank you to every single person in the chat, but I was looking at your comments and I did appreciate them so much. And we do appreciate your feedback. And we love the community that you guys have created for us. And we appreciate all of you out there, cop watcher or not. We appreciate you because we know how much you care about justice, about fairness, and about equity. And so I really appreciate it. And I want you to know that I honestly do. And of course, I do have to take some time to just once again say thanks to the Batusai, thanks to Adzari, and I have to thank every single one of our patrons personally for their support. I've got to do it. I've got to say hello to my PAR associate producers, and I'm not going to say your last name just in case for privacy. David K, John E.R., my patron super friends, Pineapple Girl and Shane Bushta. I see you in the chat. My official patrons, Calvin M and Celeste Dupuis S, Dante Kipke S, Kenneth Lawrence Ketchum, PT, and my friends of PAR, Rod B, Tamara A, TrueTube Live, XXX, Zira M, Alan J, Andrea Juliarat O, Artemis LA, Daniel Weath, Gary T, Guy B, Joel A, John K, John P, Keith Bernard M, Lacey R, Marcia E, Mark William L, RBMH, Ronald H, Ryan, Seskel S, Siggy Young, Social Nationalist, Stephen B, Stephen J, Trey P, William TG, David B, and Shushanth. So I hope I didn't butcher everyone's names, but I do want you to know how much I appreciate you, that you took the time to be with us here tonight. And I hope I will see you soon on PAR Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, where we have another investigation for you. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, as always, be safe out there.